I'm Cait Brumme, CEO of MassChallenge. MassChallenge is the global network for innovators. We have over 12 years of experience supporting high impact, high potential entrepreneurs launch and grow through our awesome network of zero equity accelerators. And while today is not about MassChallenge, I do have to pause and just shamelessly plug applications for our flagship seed accelerator program, which are now open. So if you're an entrepreneur working on an early stage business, I encourage you to check it out at masschallenge.org/apply. So with that brief commercial, let me welcome you again to Stakeholder Capitalism, the role of business in driving lasting social change. Stakeholder capitalism is a newer term. It reflects the growing sentiment or belief that the role of the company is to serve all interests of stakeholders alongside shareholders. And this includes also a conversation about incorporating environmental, social, and governance or ESG practices. So today, as we think about how do we accelerate the role of business in solving massive challenges, we're going to have a really interesting conversation exploring how we support businesses that are both directly tackling social environmental challenges head on and those that may not be in creating change we want to see in the world. So now that we're oriented, let me welcome to this virtual stage, Greg Schell, Managing Partner at Bain Double Impact. So Greg and I are going to have a conversation today. I think we're going to aim to keep it to 40 minutes, though if it's good, we may go a little bit longer. And I'd love to have you all involved. So put your questions into the Q&A bar as we go, and we'll do our best to bring it into the conversation. And then we'll also hold time specifically for Q&A at the end. So with that, Greg, welcome.
Good to be with you, Cait, again. I suppose if it's not good, we'll only last about 10 or 15 minutes.
Well, that's always the other option. And thank you. You're all dressed for success on this Friday. So we'll have a good conversation. I can feel it. I wanted to start just giving you space to tell us a little bit about your personal journey into the world of impact investing and company building.
Yeah, happy to do it. And let me thank you and thank the organizers and especially the audience for taking time on this Friday afternoon. Cait, this will be new to others, but you know this. I have been as a creature of the capital markets for a very long time and deeply believe in the power of the private sector at the same time, not just for my lived experience, Cait, but academically and otherwise. I'm all too aware of the failures, of capitalism, of capitalist system. And have worked really hard in my life as a director, as a volunteer, as a mentor, as a social scientist, really trying to study how people can live better lives, and improving standards of living and social conditions have always been at the core of my life story, and it seems to guide all of the big decisions that I make in life. And so I've spent an inordinate amount of time in the civic fabric of this region. Mostly in the areas of education and health and human services, but more broadly to that, I've studied quite a lot how capital, both philanthropic, public sector, and now private sector, can really be catalytic to causing positive change in the world, both for people and for the environment.
Mm-hmm. I mean, Greg, there's so many themes that I'm excited to unpack as we go on this journey. I think one of the things we talk often at MassChallenge as a non-equity partner in this work to mobilize entrepreneurship to drive change is the need and the opportunity for the capital markets, and in our case, the venture community itself, to move along the innovation frontier to provide space and support for more entrepreneurs. So I'm curious if you can share just a little bit about your decision to join Bain Double Impact.
Yeah, I used to say, Cait, on our first fundraise, I think it was probably pretty corny, but I meant it, and I mean it today, which is that in this role, it was really the first time that the two sides of my brain really met each other, and I saw the opportunity to really live an integrated life where what I did professionally, just really had overlap with who I am as a person, how I've guided my personal life. And in doing, I've just been so energized and with such deep sense of purpose that what I do every day really does make a difference. And so it's not as if the life that I led prior to this role, I couldn't find my way to real, positive value, but it's so much more, integrated in this fund. And I think we were doing, back when we raised our first fund, something very pioneering. I think it is true that the impact community has existed, for a really long time. That said, most of what you would now refer to as sort of impact investing would really have been done with small equity checks, and businesses that were, small and probably prior to a point where they were really scaling. I think today the impact ethos really does represent one of a small number of secular trends that I think we can see far out into the distance, where the incremental talent, as well as new business formation, does seem to organize itself around using private sector business models to do more than just seek profit. And it does seem to be something that's durable and here to stay. So I think, my story is probably not altogether different from yours or anybody on this call, which is we're all searching, for solutions to what we all acknowledge are pretty big problems. Whereas some of the attempts at solutions have either been the wrong methodology, Cait, on the one hand, or they've been insufficient and have been executed at too low a dosage. Either way, we see problems in every direction, and not always do we feel encouraged that we're on the track to, to seeing these problems be eradicated, or to see them, dramatically changed. And so I think the fact that the private sector is, coming around to acknowledging that there have been some, unrealized, opportunities for value creation, have us all energized about what's possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love the term dosage, and I think I'll pull that back in when we talk about the different levers that exist to create positive impact. But I think, to pull a couple threads on this history since you joined Bain Double Impact, I mean, it's really extraordinary when you launched, I think, the only growth equity fund out there with this explicit impact orientation. So not only was that meaningful from helping move the industry from being very niche to more mainstream, but also moving it up the value chain from funding very small companies to companies at scale. I think also coinciding with the now infamous Business Roundtable letter highlighting the role of business in supporting social stakeholder needs more broadly. Mm-hmm. And so, as you've lived the last, I think it's 8 years sort of at Bain Double Impact, where have you seen the sort of dual trends of both stakeholder capital, ESG, and then also impact investing? How has that influenced or changed the way that you're approaching your impact theses?
Yeah, there's a lot in there, Cait. I think the first thing I say, and I say it a little bit tongue in cheek, one of the things that's been disorienting as we came out with our first fund, is just the various reactions you get depending on the audience. Early days of our fund, to veterans of the impact investing field, $350 million for our first fund. We've since raised a second, as you mentioned. But $350 million seemed like the whole world. It was sort of like a sense of like, what are you doing on this block? It's, big bad private equity fund, and, all this money is coming in. On the other hand, internally and certainly relative to the world's global capital markets, 350 million is asymptotically near zero. It was always disorienting to receive how people understand, a fund like this and its role. I start there, Cait, because I've always been incredibly clear that on our best day, we will be a point of demonstration, mostly to influence not just the companies that we touch and partner with and own, but really the folks who look at what we're doing, because what we really have as our objective is to get those other folks off the sideline. The reason why I say that is because there is a seductive, need for investors to put themselves at the center of activity, but we're really not. What we're trying to do is observe changes in the world. We're trying to observe specifically the interaction between companies and the customers and constituents that they serve. And the investment capital can be a leading indicator, but for the most part, it's lacking, right? We are looking at the world and trying to figure out, based on our own analysis, where we think the world is going, and then we price assets and try to, make a dollar or a dime for our own investors. But when you take yourself out of it and you really just look at the world, it gives you just much richer perspective about the ways that you can add value, the entrepreneurs and management teams that you want to support, the issue types, the industries and subsectors that you want to go after, in a real sense for where impact value creation can be had. And that's really a place where we have a role that others cannot, which is that we can really help power and accelerate these trends. And that's when all of the great skill that we have can be brought to bear. But by no means is that the whole show. It's really looking out into the world and observing what's happening there as the fodder for what gets us excited and involved. And I've always had that perspective. So when you think about the sort of ethos of impact investing in ESG, some of it we have everything to do with, right? But a lot of it is occurring quite by necessity. You can feel what I would describe as a raised level of consciousness that we are not yet on a trajectory. Some of the big problems are on their way to being solved or even bending the curve. And I think there is a real sense that if we don't, there are real implications all over the world to be paid. I think most famously, many of us talk about sort of the effects of climate and volatility around that, and all of the very real ways people's lives are already changing, much less what is on the come potentially. But there are a whole host of issues, including income inequality and healthcare and lack of opportunity. More broadly, there are lots of issues that just feel unsustainable. And the question at every turn is to what degree can the private sector, can technology, can innovators play, in helping to get us to some higher ground?
Yes. Yeah, I think that's it's a really important lesson. I think one other thing which I'll credit the impact investing dialogue for doing is sort of opening that aperture in terms of which companies may have a unique advantage or unique economic opportunity if you look at the problem or the world slightly differently. And I know there are companies within your other portfolios that may have been overlooked until you bring a unique impact lens. I'm curious if there are examples you would highlight around that.
Yeah, I mean, look, our entire portfolio is meant to be testimony to companies who are good businesses, hopefully on their way to great, but all of whom have an impact, canon that we hope to, add to and improve and refine. I'll give one example just because I think it's so stark, as an example of Rodeo Dental. The dental business is, a favorite of private equity. There are many of them, Cait. You can, execute a roll up, constant cash flow. You can add leverage to them, to lever your equity and so forth. But most private equity investors, would tell you, stay away from two aspects of dentistry. One, avoid pediatric. Kids are, often harder to serve. And then number two, by all means, avoid sort of government pay, insurance and government reimbursement. And so we, as a self-described, social impact strategy, went right into the eye of that risk and buy a company who serves almost all pediatric clients and is almost all government pay. The reason why we did this is we found an exciting, group of dentists back who, like many of their contemporaries or older peers and such, got into dentistry, for this reason or that. But traditionally, people who wanted to do service would do like Docs Without Borders or things like that as a way to quench their thirst for service. I think as they thought about the sort of industry structure, one of the real things that they had noticed was that there are huge blocks of individuals who've not been served almost at all. Massive amount of white space is one of the building blocks of an interesting deal for the growth opportunity that it offers. In this case, you have, the low income and working poor really not getting, what I would call access to dignified healthcare services, right? A lot of practices, dental and otherwise, don't accept government insurance. And as a result, these people are underserved. What these docs understood is that rather than being like who I used to be, where they, are working, 9 to 5 and then doing service, they decided to make their practice really an opportunity to serve an underserved population. As you might guess, you do not, gain a lot of wealth by serving the government in any way. So, the reimbursement rates are probably thinner in most places than private pay would be. That said, these kids, that we serve have really been so desperately in need of service that oftentimes they come with us with a need to do 3 or 4 things, and then we can bill out, for a more full remit of services for them, and we can make a good business out of that. Said differently, because people have left this population, for dead and not served them well, it has created an enormous business opportunity for this group of docs. And because of that, it's been really fun to back them. And for anyone watching, and you were to look at any videos about this particular company, you'd see that the impact ethos lived inside of this company well before we got to them. But in partnering with them, we think that we can be catalytic to help bring them to an even higher level and contribute a lot of what we know about growth and expansion and site selection, and put them in a place where they can do what they were already doing at a level that they couldn't have done without us.
Greg, it's such a powerful case study, not only because of the impact they're having, and that's certainly the highlight, but also because I think it highlights two themes, which you've mentioned. One is having a distinctive perspective that really is impact first, with impact as an opportunity. And the second is that the need for new business models for some of these companies to launch and grow. And it sounds like these entrepreneurs approached building a dental business differently in order to economically and scalably serve an underserved population.
Yeah, I would say I like the way you put that. And the way I would say it is, I'm not sure. I learned, and I'll use a term of art here, that I was baptized in the sort of market efficiency school of investing, which is the market always knows, everything and prices assets generally perfectly. There's wisdom of crowds. And, there are aspects of that that are, of course, very powerful, and I believe them to some degree still. That's not to say that there aren't major gaps in human judgment, and that lots of people can't make similar mistakes together, that there's homogeneity in the same mistakes that people make. I'm going to say something that might be controversial, Cait, to the listeners on this call, but I'm not sure if someone told me, that the corporation as a legal entity is only capable of creating profit. I'm not sure if someone told me that when I was young and a young analyst in this business. I'm not sure if I didn't hear it like that, like I heard it, that I would have come to that conclusion. Actually, I would have come to a different conclusion observing the world, which is that there are implications for every decision around hiring, around capital allocation, about where you build, and all of these micro decisions do different things to the economy. And it's probably not the best way to organize ourselves, to where economic opportunity exists, in a small handful of markets and not others. It's probably not efficient. Those mistakes compound on each other. If you and I were, a couple and lived in San Francisco and we were both doctors, we could have, 5 roommates just to pay for the average home. I'm not sure, that makes a whole lot of sense, Cait. And I think those mistakes, once they compound, they extend to become really problematic, actually. And we're seeing the decay in a lot of our major cities for the fact that it's priced so many people out of those markets. You can't raise a family there, and all the things that end up happening as that becomes more and more out of reach. I think I read a stat a handful of years ago that the top 20 MSAs are responsible for greater than 50% of the national gross domestic product. Now think of our own region. we're not talking about Boston as an MSA that extends like 60 miles in every direction. You're talking about like 15 miles, north, south, or west, and the economic opportunity really does plummet. And so there probably is some need for consciousness for how companies make decisions. And I think it has taken us some time to get out of that very dogmatic belief. Now, someone out there, of course, is going to say, how do you know how to rebalance? Someone will say that's impossible. And so the right role of the company is quite limited. And, and so once they make a person wealthy, then that person can have, this greater judgment. And I'm not interested in having that debate here, except to say this, a new class of innovators are aiming their talent at problems in ways that are pretty exciting. And I look forward to all that's to come, because I don't think that perspective where innovators and talent are aiming their talent in those ways, I don't think that that's been a theory of change that's been disproven, frankly. And I think we've probably had our fill of people, using their great talent to, make an angry bird dance across the stage as a way to produce economic development. I'm not saying that can't or shouldn't happen. I'm saying that you can have that to excess and be missing out on opportunity costs to do some other things that quite candidly matter, a lot more to people's lives. And I think more of our talent and business models are reflecting that belief as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Greg, I think this brings me to sort of another meaty point of discussion. There are, from where I sit, there's sort of like three big levers for creating change, economic opportunity, mobility. One is picking the companies that are really going to have an outsized impact because they're building solutions that directly address a gap or a challenge. I think the second is building businesses that are more inclusive, responsible, sustainable from the beginning. And it's part of their economic model. And then the third is, I think what you were saying, that sort of trickle down, businesses create jobs and individuals therefore sort of do their own thing with their money. And historically, a lot of the weight has been on the latter. And then there's this niche sector around the first, which was, we fund a couple of social entrepreneurs. We really hope they make an impact, but they're often toiling against in non-economic conditions. And I think what's exciting about the work that you're doing at Bain Double Impact as an example of sort of what's happening industry-wide is you're committed to both picking companies that are going to have an outsized impact through the solutions that they're building. And then you're also helping build a next generation of companies with a better set of practices. And I'm just curious if you can share, does that resonate? And can you share a little bit more both about the sort of selection process and the business building process?
Yeah. Cait, you know me as an investment nerd, and I am that. But probably even before that, I'm a frustrated social scientist. I think about these issues quite a lot.
Good. Okay.
One of the most interesting things, though, about your question, and I reflect back on all the many questions and panels and speeches I've given over the last, 6+ years, on this topic. One of the most basic mistakes that I think people make is thinking that sort of impact and returns are on the same axis. They are not on the same axis. High returns and low returns are on the same axis. Sort of, great impact and nil. That is a whole different axis. You can imagine, regular way businesses being pretty crappy businesses and not offering a lot of excess return to investors at a constant level of impact. You could also imagine, by virtue of the business model, a software business probably is better than a paper company or some other capital intensive business, being, both high impact and high returning. So this idea that the two things are in competition with one another is not by definition true. You can commingle them. You can decide to make a business model more or less economic through your decision making, but you don't have to. And I think that's one of the points that this fund has always meant to demonstrate, is that is a choice you can make. I would tell you that some of the most exceptional investors that I know of are making mid-single digit returns. But guess what? That's what their return promise is to their capital providers. That would not be a successful investment strategy for a private equity firm like ours. If we offered a 10% return, we'd consider that having missed the mark. Whereas they would have blown the world, sort of set the world on fire by their 5% return. So it's really about what return level you're looking, to address and which problems you're attempting to solve. That's what I really look for most, is alignment with your objectives. That said, and more directly to your question, Cait, we both want to find businesses who have impact in their bones and have designed their business model around a social challenge. It's also true that businesses who do not self-describe as impact businesses are capable of evolving their corporate behavior to be more impactful. Let me give you an example. That same Rodeo Dental that I mentioned, they are a dental practice, full stop. They exist to serve underserved kids. They do a really nice job of that. It's important, though, for us to say that is not your only vector for impact value creation. It is still important for you to come by impact value through how you treat your employees. It is still important for you to come by your impact value through recycling policy and the responsible use of wastewater and energy and so on. So we like to create businesses who are not missing opportunities to do things that we think make them the best version of themselves. So it's both and I think in order to really, really address big societal challenges, we are not here to be exclusive or exemplary or to, exempt people from having a think different point of view for how they, go out and execute their business model. We think there are lots of, not so clean businesses like fashion and, making of clothes. It's a dirty business by and large, but it probably can be done more effectively than, fabric getting one or two turns and then end up in a landfill in frontier markets. That's probably not the best we can all do. And so with a little bit more innovation and rethink of business models, something different is possible. And it has as its positive consequence, probably some demand destruction for new fiber, right? We can recycle it more. There's probably need for, redesign of logistics. There probably need for more information about how demand aggregates. And these are roles for people to come in and be part of solutions. And that's something that I think gives me endless excitement. But first, you got to have the courage to say that the thing that I thought I knew, I'm willing to question. And that's the thing that's hardest, not the actual solution building, but the blowing up of the dogma and the piercing of all those bubbles that have existed inside people's hearts and minds for a long time.
Yeah, that is certainly the case. I'm curious with maybe your social scientist hat on, as you look at either your work with portfolio companies or sort of more at the macro level between helping entrepreneurs scale their impact through their solutions versus scale impact through decisions around employees and recycling policies and carbon footprint, et cetera. Like, how equal are those levers? And, we're sort of talking to a group of people who really want to create change in the world. Like, would you pick a lane?
What's interesting, in a way, I feel like I'm being asked to say which child I love more. But I would tell you, let me
You love one more than the other, right?
Let me give a thought. Let me give a thought, Cait, and then let me answer your question most directly. I think when we take a company on a journey and have a normal hold period of 5 or 6 years, I would love it to be the case that you do not know how we thought about it, whether it was, impact through its products or impact through its change behavior, because we'd love to say we helped this company go on a journey where both aspects of their impact value creation vibrate to the point where you couldn't tell what our entry point and what our thinking was there. That said, I would say that if you made me choose, and I'll tell you why I choose this way, having a company where the value created on behalf of the customer is probably the most important of all, and for a couple of reasons. One, it tends to be the thing around which all the talent assembles. because of their expertise. Number two, it depends. It tends to be the thing that's most durable. If you're creating a lot of impact value from serving your clients better, and you're more effective, and your care model is better, you're going to be the share gainer. And so your impact is going to scale naturally. It is a self solving, kind of equation in many cases. And then third, I think it's the fastest way to, influence the field to behave differently. If you're doing something that's winning commercially, it's highly likely that others are going to copy you. Some of the other things are probably more difficult to be replicated because there's not that strong signal of losing business based on, doing things that are not impactful. All that. So I wanted to answer you directly. That's probably my point of view. But I want to come back to what I said, which is to say that in many ways, it is a little bit of a false choice. And I think one of the vectors of value creation today that is so necessary, businesses can't get away from it, is how people treat labor. Labor has been on the other side, the wrong side of a trade toward capital, for decades now. It's pushed wages down. It has constrained growth and job satisfaction. It has been coincident with, disparity in wealth and so forth. And you can feel the world really evolving in that case, where labor is flexing, its power, where someone yesterday fought tooth and nail to say, we are never going to pay someone $15. You can't force us to. And all of a sudden they're like, $22, please, will you come? Because their whole business model is at risk when you don't have a strong, stable, motivated core of employees who are the face of your brand. And business models just fall down when you don't have people to execute even the most basic things, even in a call center. Now, try getting help, for your plane, your travel, snafu during weather, or for spring break, or for a bachelorette, Cait, and see how long you have to wait, because people have basically said it was a crummy job, and I'm not doing it for undignified wages. So take your AI and your computer animated voice and and go do something else with it. And the consequence, of course, is that you and I will wait 2 hours on the phone or have them call us back. And I just think we seem to be in a place where more innovative thinking is due, not just the hard wiring of higher prices for labor, but other things that make people motivated to knock the door down on behalf of a cause that they really believe in. And I think that's going to be a place where companies of the future really distinguish themselves. So as much as I'd say the customer lens is going to be always vitally important, it is not the only, Cait, and there are lots of good thinking required for all of us to do. So a lot of words, but hopefully you hear where
no, I appreciate you picking a favorite child despite the challenge of that decision, but also highlighting, I think, where if you were going to double down and where you could create impact in building businesses differently, I think calling labor out is such an important one. And I know over at Harvard Business School, there's been interesting work being done to try and analyze and connect the dots between better labor practices and economic value creation, which captures, I think, what we intuit, which is you'd have higher retention, lower turnover, better employee morale, leading to productivity, et cetera. So.
Totally.
Greg, before we wrap up, and I want to get your advice for folks in the room, but I'm curious, where are you seeing gaps in the solution landscape where you think there are big problem sets, technology or entrepreneurs should be playing a role, but you're just not yet seeing the pipeline or the density of companies? Because I think that type of insight can be inspiring to individuals who are looking for problems to solve. So what are the gaps that you see today?
Yeah, I think, let me answer it in these two ways. And I'll come back to the energy, the world of energy and climate as being one where there's a lot of passionate perspective on either side, right? And look, the geopolitical volatility has been, has laid that bare. on the, there were these oil and gas, CEOs testifying on Capitol Hill about why gas prices are so high. And it was not. I mean, it's really just a handful of months, that we were all sort of, stomping on their grave, COP26 and all these things, right? The world is complex, and these changes are going to evolve around, a long period of time. That feels obvious. So I don't see gaps so much by sector or investment type. I really probably see more of a generational gap, where I think young people are headlong launching into, this ethos. Much of the time they know why. They are inheriting a world that is deeply insecure in terms of, living standards and so forth. And there's disruption everywhere. And you get the sense that a prior generation or two wants to be in step with the ethos, but doesn't really come by the same belief system. And I think that's where the biggest gap is that we're all trying to come to a collective point of view, if such a thing is even possible, about the right way to go. And you can feel that tug of war occurring. The reason why I say it there is because it is true that innovation and the startup and an innovation ecosystem that so well contains a lot of individuals who are talking like how you and I are talking. But let's be clear, while they may have in the crosshair some really big scaled businesses that they want to be disruptive to, most of the assets are in the hands of really large companies and what is a frighteningly small number of people who serve as executive management, who are on these boards, who are making critical decisions. And the software is still downloading, I think, around what's possible here. And it's very hard. Let's be clear. I'm not sure you and I would be different if we were in their shoes. It's very hard to sit on legacy decisions with billions and billions and billions of dollars of capital at stake, and jump headlong into things that are unproven. Which is why what I said at the beginning is so vital, which is we have a rare opportunity, which is to be a point of demonstration. And I think what I ask of of others is one, for not to be dogmatic, be intellectually curious, and then I think number two, when things do work, be a fast follower. Not everyone is going to be innovative by definition, but be a fast follower to new and emerging evidence of the kind of world I think we all want to live in, and how possible it is with some different decisions being made. So I think those two things are probably where I end up for what I hope to see in the world and in terms of evolved behavior from folks.
Right. I think that try not to be dogmatic also applies to entrepreneurs tackling problems. One of the biggest challenges of being a socially motivated entrepreneur is being inflexible in the pivots required to get to product market fit. And so while there is absolutely opportunity to be high impact, scalable, and economically viable, there's decision points along the way that entrepreneurs need to make that are reflecting customer or market feedback. And what we see is that can be harder for individuals who come in with a really clear sense of what the solution should or could be.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think most entrepreneurs, almost by definition, are more excitable the more you tell them that something's not possible.
Yeah.
And I think most of large companies are actually the inverse, which is their incentive is to maintain status quo, especially if they're winners and defenders. So if you tell them something, if they say something's not possible, it's not because it's not possible, it's because it's inconvenient to, their place in the world. And that feels definitional to me. But I think once they're convinced that their place in the world is shifting under their feet, there's a little bit more sense of purpose, maybe a lot more for the consideration of lots of new opportunities. You can't stay on top while everybody else is trying to take you down without some real effort to be answerable to an evolving customer set of customer needs.
Yeah, unrelated example is like the newspaper industry fought for years the transition to digital, and there are certain trends which are truly inevitable. So we're going to move to Q&A in a couple of minutes. I know we already have a question from Taylor, so thank you. If others have them, pop them into Q&A so that we can bring them to Greg for all of his wisdom. But before I do that, Greg, I'd love your thoughts, just sort of advice to founders or even investors who may be in this room, where do you see companies going wrong? Like, what would be the advice that you have for founders who are both looking to solve really important problems and doing so in a commercially scalable, investable format? Like, what advice do you have for them in their early journey?
Yeah, I have a thought about this. Let me first say, I've never been an entrepreneur, except through this role and, breathing life into this fund. But I have incredible respect for entrepreneurs who wake up thinking that they can, blow a hole in the universe, even with, very, meager resources. I always think that's amazing. That said, my study of, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of companies over years has taught me a few things, Cait. And one of the things that I want to be clear to entrepreneurs is, look, having conviction is, vitally important. That's how you get people to follow you. That's how, especially when you're doing something that seems improbable. So it's really important to have that conviction. But for goodness sake, to settle in on where there's product market fit, I guess, is how we might talk about it. But you're actually quite limited in what you know or what you've proven. You have, at best, with a startup, a theory of the case. You do not have to commit to that to death, till death. You can pivot. You can learn. You can hear feedback and evolve. You can put yourself in a position where you have a point of view that is being informed, by the sort of lived experience of the customers. And I think sometimes it's such a deeply personal exercise, Cait. It is such a reputational bet that once you put something on a slide, if you come show up, in 5 weeks and say, I have a better idea, people are afraid that they'll look, people will look askance at that. But truly get over that. It is the best thing to do, to learn and be humble about the things that are showing you that they're opportune versus not. So the less time you spend trying to proselytize about something that's not working, the better. You are much better listening than, and so the tool as an entrepreneur that you should least be using is a hammer. And if you have to bang somebody over the head to come to your point of view, against, mounting evidence, it's probably not the right tool to be using. So I think that inflection point where you're listening at least as much as you're talking, is my point of counsel here. And I think we're too used to the, high ego, sort of, slightly off but genius inventor as the only model of business success, especially in the world of technology. But it just ain't so. There are lots of models of leadership, and the one that probably is always going to work best is the model that deeply understands customer need and looks relentlessly at ways to serve it. Being way out in front of people's demonstrated need is highly risky. Not to say that we all know, the folks who make that work, but there's a graveyard behind them. Odds are not good that you can lead a world to a place where it's telling you it does not want to go, rather than listening to where need is. And I think you can be very innovative about how to serve that need, and in what ways, and what resources you use. There's a lot of business model innovation. But maybe taking a hammer to my head about why I need that angry bird to dance across my screen probably is not it. So more humility, more listening, more willingness to evolve business models, more permission to have everyone in the organization listening to customers, and how to serve them the best is probably the advice I'd give. The eureka moment in the shower about how we're going to do something that's never been thought of, probably, more than slightly overrated, and more than highly improbable.
We've covered many important nuggets, but for certainly the entrepreneurs in the room, if you take away one thing, I think that is so important. There's an awesome Boston-based CEO, Corey Thomas, who talks about having an ampersand on his desk. His point being, most important truths in life lie at the intersection of things that seem in conflict. And in particular for entrepreneurs, it's conviction and humility, and holding both those true. So thank you for those thoughts. All right, we're going to go
with Corey on anytime I agree with Corey on anything, I'm in good space, I think.
Yes, exactly. So, Greg, we have a question from Taylor that I'll read to you. And I think, while may not be in your sort of day job, I think your perspective over the impact investing space could be interesting here. So Taylor's curious if non-businesses can utilize impact investing. In this case, thinking of local community leader using fundraising to develop a health center inside of a high school to support undocumented school families. This center is focused on healthcare access and equity, does not have a financial ROI, is not a business, is the only option fundraising or fundraising from philanthropy.
Yeah, so I'll rely on a couple. Thank you for the question, Taylor. I think I'll rely on two things that I said. I think number one, having the investor at the center causes, of your perspective, causes all sorts of points of distortion. And Taylor's question actually brings that to view here, which is to say, whether it's philanthropic capital, whether it is earned revenue, whether it is a donation of a different type, whether it's sponsorship. The question is really for what purpose should this capital be called at all? Have you met the requirements of saying money is our central challenge and it is our best methodology to solve a given problem? And to what extent is that obvious to the neutral observer? So to the question, no, I don't think philanthropic capital is the only thing. Perhaps there are things that can be done inside that business or organization that could represent opportunities for earned revenue. And that itself is a different kind of perspective. But what I would say as a headline answer is that the impact ethos is really about being intentional with the use of capital to achieve a particular social or environmental good. So that intentionality is everything. And so if in that business we are replicating that level of intentionality, which is we are using capital in order to achieve these ends, then Taylor, the question that we all get to ask is some version of, did it work? And if it didn't, it goes back to what Cait and I were talking about earlier, which is it didn't work because there was not enough dosage, i.e. you used one unit instead of the 5 that were required, or there actually is not a high correlation between the number of units and the intended outcome, and that would mean to me that's a wrong methodology. 1 unit, or 10, it's not going to solve your challenge, and that is not a question of dosage at all. It'd be the question. I hate to delve into this, but it's just the thing that I thought of. I was thinking to myself, if you take ivermectin for your COVID, perhaps it's not going to matter if you take 10 gallons of it. If it's not the right method, it isn't. Dosage is a really important concept, actually, Cait, and you mentioned that you could come back to it. Sometimes, and startups are incredibly efficient animals about how they use capital. They have to be. Sometimes more capital is unnecessary, and what a wonderful thing that is to conclude. Sometimes not enough capital, manifests in not getting enough of the intended result. So I think to Taylor's point, I'd just like to say capital can be used, for good or ill, or to be neutral. But what we really want to be about the business of is measuring, or at least trying to be attuned to whether or not A, it's the right methodology, and B, is it being done in the right dosage? Because ultimately, the only thing that matters is it working? Are you serving these constituents in a way that suggests that you're being effective enough to engender and deserve more capital? So that's kind of how I would think about it.
And Greg, one thing I'll add as a poor nonprofit in this category also is, I think the dosage, the fit, and then also the phasing. And so it may be that as you get this project or effort off the ground, that the no strings, or it's never no strings attached, the no return profile of required of philanthropy is really the most appropriate type of pre-seed or seed capital to let you focus on that model and that impact, and then explore the options for financing it over the long term, whether it's continuing to be through philanthropy, through government, through earned revenue, or potentially through investment. But bringing capital in prematurely that has interests other than impact is not necessarily a bad thing, but it will certainly influence how you build a business.
Yeah, and I think before we take our next question, Cait, I'd maybe reiterate that theme that in many cases, most social entrepreneurs, as many private sector entrepreneurs, tend to believe that if they just had that additional dollar, they'd be able to prove, efficacy. And it's often the case that entrepreneurs don't stay long enough in that realm of methodology, being clear that you're right about that, such that when that dollar comes, it's a very expensive experiment to say we needed $10 and we could change the world, and then you get 11 and you're not having very much success. It's very difficult to then say, well, we were wrong, we really needed 25. You usually don't get a chance to continue to make that argument. So demonstrated success is really, really important, even with what one might deem to be fewer than required amounts of resources.
Greg, I'd love to just do one follow-on question here to that regard, which is when you're working with entrepreneurs to make an investment, how do you think about then setting out those milestones to align on amount of capital needed to catalyze to that next end state, both in terms of the economic profile, but also the impact profile of the business?
Yeah, I would tell you that one of the reasons why I talked about humility and listening is because we try to practice that. We don't, drop a business plan onto companies that we partner with. They, in many ways, are going to know their business in more detail than we could ever. That said, we bring a lot to the table, and we have talent in many cases that they do not. So it's a conversation, and I think what we're good at Bain Capital is trying to be empirical in everything that we think. I don't just have a point of view for its own sake. I've been compelled to think what I think based on analysis that we've run. It does not mean that our analysis is always right, but at least we have a guidepost to say, based on these things, we can have a conversation or debate points of view. And if you have better analysis, or you can demonstrate that I'm on the wrong track, so be it. I will tear up what I've thought about and done if you come, Cait, with something that's more compelling. And that level of iteration is something that I hope we bring to the table to our companies, which is to say, what do you think, and why do you think it, and what should we do about it? And I think what comes out of that is much more seamless execution when there's agreement, when both we and the companies we partner with are contributing all of our skills together. You tend to come up with a much better answer. Once we come up with an answer, I'd echo that sort of methodology versus dosage point to add one more thing. Execution is everything. I might know what we should do to hit 100-mile-an-hour fastball, but that doesn't mean we can go do it. It takes operating skill. For me, is the thing in investing that's in shorter supply. Really elite operators and people who can execute a plan. I almost don't care what they know how to do. I want that person, guy or gal on my team, because they tend to be people who can pick up problems of different types and solve those too. So that's really what I love to be alongside and a part of. Show me somebody who's an expert at executing, and I want to be, rocked to sleep, by that person. It's just the best thing to come in. It doesn't matter if it's a CEO or a doctor or somebody, in personal travel or personal finance. It doesn't matter. When you have differential levels of expertise and can execute a plan, there's just nothing like that. So I've always enjoyed trying to be on the lookout for that level of elite operating and execution talent.
Great. We'll leave just a minute more for any final questions, but Greg, this has been an extraordinary conversation. I think you've given us optimism that we're in the midst of an important sea change in how companies are built and how capital supports them, that hopefully gets us to a more equitable, a more sustainable world. And yet the problems are huge. And so for those individuals who are willing to be bold and tackle them, please do. Greg is waiting to fund you as you get larger, but you got to listen along the way. And so for both the big picture thinking and the personal advice, Greg, thank you for having this conversation with us today.
My pleasure.